Welcome back to Not on TV, and there is a lot to go through, so we'll start right away. That opening clip was apparently from the Wuhan lab, where the virus was first identified from. If that is the case, it's a little bit suspicious, don't you think? Interesting developments in Belgium. This is a report on a document that's been submitted by some doctors to the Belgian government.
We ask for an open debate where all experts are represented without any form of censorship. After the initial panic surrounding COVID-19, the objective facts now show a completely different picture. There is no medical justification for any emergency policy anymore. The current crisis management has become totally disproportionate and causes more damage than it does any good. We call for an end of all measures and ask for an immediate restoration of our normal democratic governance and legal structures of all our civil liberties. Now, The letter goes on. I want to keep reading this. It's so powerful. As doctors and health professionals, in the face of the virus, which in terms of its harmfulness, mortality, and transmissibility approaches the seasonal influenza, we can only reject these extremely disproportionate measures. And this is what they call for. We therefore demand an immediate end to all measures. We're questioning the legitimacy of the current advisory experts who meet behind closed doors, and we call for an in-depth examination of the role of the WHO and the possible influence of conflicts of interest in this organization. It is also at the heart of the fight against the infodemic, the systemic censorship of all dissenting opinions in the media. This is unacceptable for a democratic state governed by rule of law.
And a comment here from a Dr. David Samadi about the very confusing information that we are continually getting from the World Health Organization.
Because they're taking a 360-degree turn, and WHO is announcing, and this is a big news, that asymptomatic people out there are not contagious. Remember, because we didn't know who would be passing this virus or not, we made everybody do something called social distancing. This is a new word that you've heard of it, and it came to our life a few months ago. We made everybody across the board to wear masks. At the beginning, we said if you have symptoms, you wear the mask to protect others, and then we gave in because CDC and everybody kept changing back and forth. We also made everybody to go for testing. We need 300 million tests the next day, or else we cannot reopen our country. And guess what? This thing, this is very important. It's a breaking news that if you are not symptomatic and you don't have any symptoms of fever, chill, shortness of breath, or any of those symptoms we've spoken about, the risk of passing it on to other people and being contagious is very rare.
Next, we have a governor in Florida questioning another doctor about the validity of lockdowns.
So back in March, it made sense to flatten the curve because we don't want to overburden the hospitals. And I think that was a success in most parts of the world, except I think Spain and Northern Italy. But if you do a lockdown beyond that, you're sort of pushing the cases in the future. And instead of sort of doing a lockdown that's general for the whole population, that doesn't make sense from a public health perspective. So instead, what Dr. Bhattacharya said is that we have an enormous difference in risk by age. So everybody can get infected. And but the risk for mortality is more than 1,000-fold different the risk for the oldest people versus the younger. So for the older people, this is worse than the annual flu, but for children, this is much milder than the annual flu. Normally, we have a few hundred deaths of children dying from the flu every year, and that's much less here. And even in a country like Sweden, where they never closed the schools, all daycare and schools in Sweden was open from age 1 to 15 throughout the height of the pandemic there. And among the 1.8 million children in Sweden, there were exactly 0 deaths from COVID-19.
So it seems that the strictest lockdowns in the world are having absolutely no effect on the eventual outcome, and if anything, they're worse. And the madness just seems to go on and on. Here is a woman getting tasered and arrested for not wearing a mask. We know that the science does not support the fact that masks are in any way efficient or effective for stopping the spread of a virus.
I am. Call the cops, Raven. Call the cops? Yeah. Will you talk? Tase somebody over a mask. Tasing this lady over not wearing a damn mask.
Incidentally, this was in America, and we seem to have people allowed to burn stores and start fires and shoot people, and they get either ignored or released quickly on bail after committing crime after crime, and then we have incidents like this. And the government in the UK now telling us what we should be doing with our intimate lives. I find all this really patronizing, and I find the whole interview actually really difficult to watch. Feel free to look at the full interview yourself.
Why am I whispering? I don't know.
I don't know. You're live on national TV.
Indeed.
Look, there are.
It's okay to smile.
In these rules that we have to bring in, you have to have. There have to be boundaries, to coin a phrase. That we have to. If you're saying that two households shouldn't mix, which we are in some parts of the country, in the northeast, the northwest, in Scotland, in parts of Wales, then you have to then define what is the boundary of that, and that does lead to some.
That's my question. I mean, established relationship. Does that mean if I say I love you? I mean, because some people say that and they don't mean it. But are you in an established relationship then? I don't know. I
think we should stick to the letter of it, which is that it's okay in an established relationship.
And what does that mean to you? I mean, I know what it means to you and Mrs. Hancock. But
that was exactly how I was going to answer. Yeah. I know that I'm in an established.
And when it comes to governments in relation to health, we have to look at things historically. And not so long ago, here's an admission from President Clinton about tests being done on the unwitting public.
Hospitals, universities, and military bases around our nation. Informed consent means your doctor tells you the risk of the treatment you are about to undergo. In too many cases, informed consent was withheld. Americans were kept in the dark about the effects of what was being done to them. The deception extended beyond the test subjects themselves to encompass their families and the American people as a whole. For these experiments were kept secret, and they were shrouded not for a compelling.
And here we have an English minister admitting that the tests are quite inaccurate. So why, in the same sentence, he's pushing for these tests to be ramped up, I really am not too sure.
The false positive rate is very high. So only 7% of tests will be successful in identifying those that actually have the virus. So the truth is you can't just rely on that. And in fairness, I don't think those advocating it think that you can. You'd still have to rely on the self-isolation at home and have further testing
5
there.
days later, but why not do that?
Well, actually, that's what we have. We have self-isolation at home, and we want to make sure we ramp up the testing capacity to alleviate that and other measures. But the truth is with test and trace, and there'll be, we've made huge gains over the last few months. We are prioritising key workers on the front line, NHS workers, care home workers. We've got our testing rate per capita is ahead of any other major country, ahead of all the other European countries. But we do have to look at what we're prioritising and what's going to be the most effective.
And here is a US citizen speaking in front of a hearing. And what she has to say, I think, is very important. And it is making a hell of a lot more sense than the majority of so-called experts and leaders that I've heard speaking recently.
Watched your meeting last week, and you mentioned meeting with the heads of doctors at area hospitals and their recommendations for masks. In fact, regarding masks and their recommendation, the New England Journal of Medicine states, and I quote, "The chance of catching COVID-19 from a passing interaction in a public space is minimal. In many cases, the desire for widespread masking is a reflexive reaction to anxiety over the pandemic." That's a placebo effect. The masks that you're wearing are a placebo, and the doctors know this. It's a false sense of security. It makes people just feel like they're doing something. If you commissioners and the medical experts want to truly affect public health positively, especially as a way to reduce viral spread and lower the mortality rate, instead, you would mandate fresh fruits and vegetables. You would mandate daily exercise. You would mandate stress reduction techniques and a good night's sleep. You would mandate spending time outdoors. The mask is not about health. Instead, during this pandemic, in the state of Kansas, access to abortion, alcohol, tobacco, and fast food have remained essential. But my personal freedom in the choices I make for myself and my family's health have been mandated by a board of commissioners. Your mandates are not only unjust, they are unlawful. In fact, a federal judge in Pennsylvania last week agreed with me. Your mandate is in violation of our Constitution. It is in violation of our civil rights. It is in violation of our religious liberties. Do not wait for litigation to make this right.
Another example of how we hear all these chaotic reports about hospitals being busy, and here is another hospital in America that is empty.
Good, man. I'm just looking for the sick people. I'm looking for COVID patients. Where are all the sick people? Got people standing around, sitting around. This is Montgomery General, former Montgomery General. Nobody's here. Look, not a soul. Where are the sick people? Where's all the COVID patients? I'm not asking deceiving me. Where are the sick people? You got a big empty building out there, temporary building. No one's in there. No one's in here. Where's everybody? Where's all the sick people dying of COVID? Where are they? I want to know. Yeah, that's right, because there aren't any, right? There aren't any. That's the truth. There's no COVID patients here. None.
I'm quite confused that we have this pandemic or epidemic or whatever it's being referred to now, and we have hospitals all over the world that are empty and their numbers are way below normal. Another citizen making a very good point. At what stage do the masks actually come off? Bearing in mind that the idea was always to slow down the spread and not stop it. Historically, we know we have never stopped any sort of virus or flu. So we seem to have a perception in the public opinion that wearing masks and staying indoors is actually going to stop this virus. As soon as the masks come off or the so-called social distancing stops, etc., we are going to get the cases that would have normally happened coming into the community.
To keep them on until they tell us to. Are y'all waiting for the vaccine? They're now saying without a vaccine, you can't take off your mask. This is a joke, ladies and gentlemen. Right, sir? Take off your mask, folks, or else they're never coming off. This is the United States, not the United Nations. Okay? We have to recognize tyranny when we see it. This is not going to stop with masks.
This is an excellent little clip here put together about, again, the irrationality of the directions that we're getting. Involved here is information from a Professor Hennigan, who is eminently qualified to be able to speak on these matters. Have a close listen to what he has to say.
People following the simple rules, the rule of 6, hands face space, and then local restrictions if you've got them in your area.
His line manager at a lab today in Oxford as the Office for National Statistics announced that 6,000 people in England per day were newly infected in the first week of September, almost double the previous week.
Because you can shed RNA for up to 3 months, despite having the infection for only 8 days, we are potentially following people who are red herrings. You end up with this problem of false positive. You are identifying too many people who could have had the infection in the past. When you do a PCR test, you basically amplify the amount of RNA, you put it into a DNA copy, and then you exponentially double that amount of DNA. And that's called the cycle threshold. And the more times you do that, the less virus you start out with. And a cycle threshold above 35 generally is people who are not infectious, yet NHS England documentation that has not been updated since January runs cycle thresholds to 45, which is identifying people who are not infectious.
The coronavirus test, it measures only a very tiny piece of the genome of the virus. And if your immune cells have killed the virus, then you have debris, you have pieces of the nucleic acids in your blood and everywhere, and the assay can pick up these rotten pieces and then it looks like as if you're infected. You're not. The most panic-inducing principle, namely that most media still speak about today we had so many new infections, which is totally, it's not true.
Well, the latest government figures show the highest daily number of new infections.
As the increase in the number of daily infections.
The rate of infections are growing significantly.
With what is clearly a second wave of infection about to break.
It's not true.
NHS England documentation that has not been updated since January runs cycle thresholds to 45, which is identifying people who are not infectious.
A US Independent reporter, Ben Swan, has been doing excellent commentary on this all the way through, and I suggest that you listen to some of his other stuff on YouTube, but here's a little bit of what he has to say.
Why do we continue to trust and believe government scientists, who, by the way, are funded not only by government, but by private enterprises and private foundations like the Gates Foundation? Why are we trusting those entities and those individuals with public policy when they have already, in the case of the coronavirus, been proven wrong time and time again? This is maybe one of the most significant questions of our time. Why are we trusting people to make public policy that is controlling business, it is controlling our futures, our educations, our children, our lives? They are making these policies and they're basing them on models that have been proven wrong time and time again. This is the only time that I know of in human history where people can make wrong predictions, get it completely wrong, cause enormous detriment to people's lives, and then are listened to when they come back with their next projection. Equally as fantastical as the one before, and equally as wrong. It's time for us to say no more to these ridiculous ideas coming from government scientists who in fact are not acting on behalf of the people, but acting on behalf of their funders.
And this is some advice from another expert at the World Health Organization.
Joining me now from Geneva is Dr. Margaret Harris from the World Health Organization. Dr. Harris, Boris Johnson says a second wave is coming. Is that your assessment too?
Good evening, Jackie. What we've had all along is transmission, and we're now seeing a big rise in transmission. The moment when it was really brought down after everybody had been in lockdown, unfortunately, that moment was lost. That was the time to ease the lockdown, learn to live the new normal, not the old normal, but unfortunately people went back to the old normal, and we are indeed seeing a big rise in transmission. Should have listened to the message. Now it's a hard one. It's a very hard one in the middle of summer. People felt they'd done their bit and they were looking for their rewards. So there was too much physical contact, too many gatherings. I mean, it wasn't necessarily the pubs and nightclubs. A lot of the gatherings were in homes. People just thought they really were going back to this old normal. We have to learn the new dance, the corona.
So apparently we all have to do the COVID dance. If that wasn't one of the most patronizing and insulting directions that I've heard recently, I don't know what is. Absolutely appalling. This information is fairly concerning. We hear of some people using the expression plandemic, and I can see why many people are suspicious when they hear information like this.
Quote, because of a concern for reemergence or a deliberate release of SARS coronavirus, vaccine development was initiated. That sentence was written into a patent application on March the 28th, 2019. So that means before March 28th, 2019, a deliberate release of SARS coronavirus was not only contemplated, but Moderna wrote it into their patent applications. This is not a company that was operating in the conjecture theoretical world. This was not a company that was in the middle of this anonymous R&D program that was just happenstance to be running along looking at coronavirus. But on March the 28th, 2019, suddenly a SARS beta coronavirus specific vaccine, and specifically not just SARS beta coronavirus, specifically the S1 spike protein, the thing that was allegedly novelly modified in December of 2019 in a bat cave in China, that was specifically referenced in March 2019.
And here's another Irish professor, an apparent expert, and the information that he is, and the information that he's given in this video has so many holes in it.
You're going to socialize. If you're going to do mad stuff, do it outside. It's much safer to have 200 of your closest friends in a field or 200 of your closest friends in a football pitch than to have 20 of your closest friends in the back of your house.
So you're not too worried about the outdoor raves?
I'm not too worried about them. It's very, I think the behaviour of the people around the Oliver Bond was disgraceful. Now remember, they weren't from the Oliver Bond. They came from outside.
Yeah, that's a different issue, I think, though, isn't it?
Because it's much safer. We know roughly what the costs of this are. We see it. We can see our economy dipping. We can see unemployment rising. We can see all the expenditure the government is making. That is all driven by the amount of virus in circulation. If we drive the virus down, the countries that are doing okay economically with this are China, very few cases, South Korea, very few cases, Vietnam, effectively no cases, Taiwan, effectively no cases. New Zealand is doing okay. They have almost no cases. Their economy has dipped, but that's probably for other reasons.
So these are the places that are chasing it down.
Yes, and that is what we need to do. My bet on this is that if we don't get this under control, there will be a Europe-wide lockdown.
So he's talking with authority on different countries, including Taiwan, and Taiwan didn't have a lockdown. Germany's procedures were incredibly different to other countries, and we still have the sore thumb in the narrative of Sweden, which is doing infinitely better than many other places. Another expert from the UK, the Chief Medical Advisor, Chris Whitty.
The problem with a pandemic or an epidemic infection like this is if I as an individual increase my risk, I increase the risk to everyone around me and then everyone who's a contact to theirs. And sooner or later the chain will meet people who are vulnerable or elderly or have a long-term problem from COVID. So you cannot in an epidemic just take your own risk. Unfortunately, you're taking a risk on behalf of everybody else. It's important that we see this as something we have to do collectively. And there are broadly 4 things we can do over the next period to get on top of this. The first of which is reducing our individual risk. And this is around the things that we all know about: hands, face, space, washing hands, using masks, particularly in environments which are enclosed, in public transport and so on, and also, in particular, having space between people whenever we can achieve it, especially when indoors. The second group of things are things we can do to isolate the virus. So if people have symptoms, they must self-isolate, and we must find their contacts so that they can isolate, and in people who've travelled from high-risk areas, they also should isolate. And this means that they are taking, on behalf of society, a big step forward to keep the virus out of circulation whilst they are still infectious. This is an absolutely critical part of the response. The third one, and in many ways the most difficult, is that we have to break unnecessary links between households, because that is the way in which this virus is transmitted. And this means reducing social contacts, whether they are at work, and this is where we have enormous gratitude to all the businesses, for example, who've worked so hard to make their environments COVID secure to reduce the risk, and also in social environments. And we have to try and do this in the least damaging way. But we all know we cannot do this without some significant downsides. And this is a balance of risk between, if we don't do enough, the virus will take off. And at the moment, that is the path that we are clearly on. And if we do not change course, then we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult problem, as Patrick has laid out. The final thing we can do is the science. Is investing in drugs, vaccines, diagnostics, and Patrick is going to take us through, as the final section, where we've got to with the most exciting of these, which is vaccines.
Of course, all this information flies in the face of advice he gave at the start of all this, and recently it's been discovered that he has something like £600,000 invested in a company that is associated with making vaccines. He's telling us with authority and with no evidence that we have to break are links between different households in order to stop the spread of a virus which has a zero mortality just about in people who are young. Another excellent little compilation here of some very interesting and curious advice we're being given by the World Health Organization.
And we do have, I think, a couple of strategies that are available to us, one of which is the flood strategy.
Today, I'm announcing a new United Nations Communications Response Initiative to flood the internet with facts and science while countering the growing scourge of misinformation.
The second of which is relying and informing and equipping trusted sources of information with the facts so they can then pass that on.
The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation spends tens of millions of dollars per year on media partnerships, sponsoring coverage of its program areas across the board. Gates funds The Guardian's Global Development website. Gates funds NPR's global health coverage. Gates funds the Our World in Data website that is tracking the latest statistics and research on the coronavirus pandemic. Gates funds BBC coverage of global health and development issues, both through its BBC Media Action Organization and the BBC itself. Gates funds World Health coverage on ABC News.
But we also need to actually think about a technological answer to this. So there is work that's being done to actually create algorithms to sift through information on these kind of social media platforms. And I know that the Gates Foundation and others are funding organisations to work on things like this. So there is work that's being done to actually create algorithms to sift through information on these kind of social media platforms. And I know that the Gates Foundation and others are funding organisations to work on things like this in order that people can actually have more confidence in the sources that they will use in any event.
Wild conspiracy theories are infecting the internet. Social media companies must do more to root out hate and harmful assertions about COVID-19.
Professor Michael Levitt has been speaking out a lot about this over the last few months, and in fact since it began, and he has been a very rational and appropriate voice for everything here. He shows his frustration in this little clip, and quite rightly, I think.
I think if we had initially just a few scientists talking to each other on Zoom, not about the opinions, but about the data. What is the population infection ratio? What is the severity? Does the thing grow exponentially? There are some very, very simple questions, and it's true that the epidemiologists were always saying that we're not epidemiologists, but the fact is that viral cases and deaths follow a time trajectory, and I think physicists and theoretical chemists who understand trajectories are way better qualified. The epidemiologists made their normal error. Epidemiologists do not, they see their job not as getting things correct, but preventing an epidemic. So therefore, if they say it's 100 times worse than it's going to be, it's okay. Their mistake was that we listened to them. They said the same thing for Ebola. They said the same thing for bird flu. No one shut down for them. We should never have listened to the epidemiologists. They have caused hundreds of billions of dollars worth of suffering and damage, mainly on the younger generation. This is going to be a tragedy of, it's going to make 9/11 look like a baby story. This is much, much worse. I am not against lockdown. I am against stupid lockdown without considering the full picture, i.e. not just combating a virus that is exactly as dangerous as flu, but also avoiding the economic damage that every country has caused itself except Sweden. We have really, really failed as a group. There have been smart people in Sweden, and that's about it. Germany is getting reinfected because they cut down too strongly. The level of stupidity that's been going on here has been amazing, and it just required a little bit of discussion of smart people. I'm not saying I'm right, but I would like people to conjure me on the details. Why is it not exponential? I can show you. Why is the case infection ratio this, not that? There is data for this. In other words, everything is data-driven, but people have chosen not to look at the data. Even in many places, the politics has infected the scientists. Certainly in the USA, the politics has infected the scientists.
Very interesting interview here from a former BBC journalist who has colleagues or ex-colleagues who worked in the BBC, and she is reporting that many of them are not happy about the information they are being forced to tell the public.
It's starting to look sinister. But if you ask me who is behind this, I cannot say. I don't know, but I'm determined to find out, and views are welcome. But in particular, Professor Richard Ennos was at a demonstration, a protest in Edinburgh on the 5th of September. He was approached by a BBC reporter who said that they were sent to smear. That was later confirmed the next day because that BBC reporter asked for his comments to be removed from my broadcast. So we are in a very serious situation indeed. I'm getting people from my past. I worked at ITV and also at the BBC. I'm getting them contacting me now. I've also got an insider at the BBC telling me what's really going on. We are in a very serious position indeed, with a certain generation looking to these media brands for comfort and security and surety in a time of crisis, and they're not getting it. And I think I'm in a place where I can hopefully give a platform to any BBC journalists right now, or ITV journalists or Sky or Guardian, who don't feel comfortable with the messages they're putting out. They're very, very welcome on my channel anytime.
So, Anna, you don't feel that readers and listeners and viewers are getting the truth from the main media outlets?
She's implying that they know it's inaccurate and they know it's wrong. Fairly rarely in the mainstream are we seeing ministers getting appropriately questioned. And this minister seems fairly keen to avoid the question that the CDC has dramatically revised its figures in relation to direct COVID deaths.
No underlying issues under the age of 60. Do you know what that figure is roughly?
No, the figure isn't broken down in that way.
Oh, it is? It is? It is. It is absolutely under Public Health England document. Do you want me to tell you what the figure is, or do you want to make a rough guess at how many huge numbers of people have died who are otherwise healthy in this country?
Go for it, Julia, but the point I was making...
It's 307, Mr. Argyle. 307 people between February and early September who did not have any underlying serious health complaints under the age of 60 died in English hospitals this year from COVID-19. And yet we are looking at massive restrictions to people's freedoms, mass chaos, massive hit to our economy.
Does seem to be that they are keeping up a little bit of a pretense here. Back to Sweden.
People can just hang out together, seek shelter from the cold in cozy restaurants, go for a drink or a coffee.
It's been crowded all over, all the bars and restaurants and so on.
You can shop for fashion and beauty products, or even allow a hairdresser to invade your personal space.
Sooner or later I will get corona, I think, so.
You've accepted that will happen?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, it's important to look good.
Yeah, you're right.
That sums up the authorities' approach here. COVID-19 is going to be around for a while, and society must find a way to live with it. So, no forced lockdown. Instead, an emphasis on personal responsibility. Please work from home, keep to yourself in public. The official rule in bars and restaurants is stay an arm's length apart. No gatherings of more than 50 people. Elementary and middle schools are still open, while most high school students and college students study at home.
The point here is that we have never been able to stop viruses. We should carry on living, protect the people who are vulnerable, and basically allow the normal progression of an illness in order to achieve herd immunity in a population. How can we trust anything that's coming from the authorities? This is the CDC director and what he has to say, and we'll follow that up with another clip from prior to this.
I comment directly about the president, but I am going to comment as the CDC director that face masks, these face masks, are the most important, powerful public health tool we have. And I will continue to appeal for all Americans, all individuals in our country, to embrace these face coverings. I've said it, if we did it for 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks, we'd bring this pandemic under control. These actually, we have clear scientific evidence they work, and they are our best defense. I might even go so far as to say that this face mask is more guaranteed to protect me against COVID than when I take a COVID vaccine, because the immunogenicity may be 70%. And if I don't get an immune response, the vaccine's not going to protect me. This face mask will. So I do want to keep asking the American public to take the responsibility, particularly the 18 to 25-year-olds, where we're seeing the outbreak in America continue to go like this, because we haven't got the acceptance, the personal responsibility that we need for all Americans to embrace this face mask.
Should you wear a mask if you're healthy?
No.
And is there a way? Should you wear a mask if you're healthy?
No.
Many of you might be aware of a project called Agenda 21, which sets out how countries are meant to be developing in the future. And here is a little bit of commentary on that.
On the Hegelian dialectic, and that says that a crisis is created and a solution is posed, and the balance between the two then becomes the new normal. And the balance between the two then becomes the new normal, which is something that you never would have accepted. But now that there's a crisis, then you are forced or pressured to accept this new solution.
Now imagine a world where mass outbreaks of deadly diseases are commonplace. Well, it sounds scary, but that might not be too far off. The World Health Organization has warned in a BBC interview that we're entering a new phase where such a reality is, quote, a new normal.
As the coronavirus pandemic brings life across the country to a grinding halt, Americans are facing a new normal.
It is a new normal that we all have to get used to.
I know a big question, Tom, from a lot of New Yorkers. When might we ever get back to normal? The governor talked today about working toward a new normal.
So we're going to a different place, which is a new normal.
So, Bill, you know, here we are. Many people are aware that you warned of this in the New England Journal of Medicine and during a TED Talk just a couple of years back. So what do we need to do right now in order to reopen the country to get back to, you know, some sort of normalcy and sort of set a new normal, whatever the new normal is?
Well, I will say it's three phases. The acute phase we're in now, the semi-normal phase until we get a vaccine, and the semi-normal phase until we get a vaccine, and then the truly normal phase after the vaccine has protected all of us.
Let's jump back to face masks and let's hear what was said at the beginning of the year.
And the use of masks by the general public, especially outdoors, is extremely weak.
We do not recommend face masks for general wearing.
The evidence on face masks has always been quite variable, quite weak.
The evidence is weak and the effect is small.
Face coverings will become mandatory.
In terms of wearing a mask, our advice is clear that wearing a mask if you don't have an infection really reduces the risk almost not at all. So we do not advise that.
And wearing of face masks by the general public. This has been a controversial area in pandemic preparedness and planning for the 15 years that I've been involved in it. And indeed, I was on the phone this morning to a colleague in Hong Kong who's a professor there, who's done the evidence review for the World Health Organization on face masks. And we're of the same mind that there is no evidence that general wearing of face masks by the public who are well affects the spread of the disease in our society. But in terms of the hard evidence and what the UK government recommends, we do not recommend face masks for general wearing by the public.
The evidence on face masks has always been quite variable, quite weak, quite difficult to know exactly, and there's no real trials on it. And we've undertaken a review. We'll give our advice to ministers, and they'll make decisions about what to do around that.
When the evidence around the use of masks by the general public, especially outdoors, is extremely weak.
So we haven't got enough top-end masks. Is that what I take from that?
That's not how I'm putting it. It's that we've got to make sure that they're prioritised, but also you've got to follow the evidence in terms of how effective mask wearing is.
On face masks, we are guided by the science, and the government position hasn't changed. Professor McLean will explain the science. The government position, the UK government position, hasn't changed. Not least because the most important thing people can do is the social distancing.
I've been fairly critical about Dr. Fauci in the past, and I think this little interview here sums things up very well.
Destroying middle class. So when I get the emotional response of, oh, you can't beat up an old guy. Well, actually, I'm not beating up an old guy. I'm pointing out that a criminal, and once again, let's be precise. What is the crime? The crime is by sitting on 3 boards and being the director of funds. He has violated the Clayton Act of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he may have 1,000 reasons why he thinks it's justified, but it isn't. It's a violation of the law.
That's right.
And he should be cuffed. He should be tried. And I would add to everything else the fact that when you authorize a foreign pathogen to enter the United States after the U.S. government has said it is unethical to do gain-of-function research, that's intent.
Yeah.
That's premeditated.
That's right.
Somebody is actually using this criminal to act an unspeakable amount of terror on the U.S. and the global population.
Mm-hmm.
And they're using him because they know he's compromised.
Many people ask, what is there to gain? As I've shown in some previous videos, we have the World Economic Forum that seems to have quite a bit invested in the outcome of what's going to happen with coronavirus.
Medical experts now acknowledge that lockdowns don't work. They see that treatment with hydroxychloroquine and zinc does work. And the government responses globally have led to a massive destruction of wealth, well-being and work. Now, none of that makes any sense until you open your mind to consider if there's another agenda at work here. It's one we've seen before, but now it has a new name. It's called the Great Reset. Here's Klaus Schwab, the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion and equality. Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight the virus, but to shape the system for the need for the post-corona era. But we have another choice. We can build a new social contract. In short, we need a great reset. We have to mobilize all constituents of our global society to work together. We must not miss this unique window of opportunity.
He admits that COVID-19 is the new excuse to usher in the Green New Deal that climate alarmists, climate profiteers and big government advocates have been pushing for years. The Great Reset is a Trojan horse for the socialist agenda of crony capitalism and control. Incredibly, this agenda has been around for a long time, but it's just been hiding in plain sight. In 2010, Dr. Ottmar Edenhofer, then co-chair of the IPCC working group, said, "We, the UN IPCC, redistribute the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has nothing to do with environmental policy anymore."
And here's a discussion with the Minister for Health in Ireland.
Luke O'Neill, he's an immunologist in Trinity College Dublin. I don't know if you know him.
I've been listening to him a lot. He's been talking a lot of sense, yeah.
Okay, well, see, he tweeted, Oxford Group and highly reputable Jenner Institute led by Sarah Gilbert, who worked with the Ebola, flu and MERS, optimistic that vaccine for COVID-19 will be ready by September. Now, on the flip side of that, I was listening to Michael Barbaro on the New York Times talking to a prominent American immunologist and said, actually, the quickest turnaround there's ever been for a vaccine is 4 years. And all this talk of, you know, miraculous vaccines popping up in the next few months is fanciful at best and really irresponsible at worst. What's your understanding, I guess, from the people you've talked to about where that may or may not be, the timeline?
Quite frankly, they don't yet know. So Luke O'Neill is one of the brightest people in our country, so I listen very carefully to what he has to say. And there are some encouraging signs that there's a number of vaccines, I think about 5, now at various stages of trials across the world. But remember, this is a coronavirus, COVID-19. That means there's been 18 other coronaviruses. And I don't think they've actually successfully found a vaccine for any.
We have vaccines being rushed in at warp speed, and as you've kind of heard quite clearly here, and you heard what he said at the end there, after 19 iterations of a coronavirus, not one vaccine has been successfully found. All sounds a little bit Orwellian, doesn't it? Well, here's actually an interview with the man himself, George Orwell, and somebody has put this excellent little clip together.
You once claimed that you have an ability to face unpleasant facts. Is that what you've demonstrated in 1984 by drawing an accurate portrait of the future?
something like 1984 could actually happen. This is the direction the world is going in at the present time.
He's choking me! He's choking me! What the fuck?
Hey, stop breaking my shit! Leave my shit! Whoa, whoa, whoa! Yeah, okay. All right, stop! I'll stop!
In our world, there will be no emotions except fear, rage, triumph, and self-abasement. But always there will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless.
Now, you're under arrest in relation to incitement.
What on earth? Excuse me.
Yeah, she's pregnant, so...
Take it easy.
Relax! She's got anxiety, relax! Relax, she's sick! She's actually sick!
Here's a very high-profile US member of the US government talking about the killing of children in Iraq.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
This next clip shows an interview with an Australian senator, a Mr. Craig Kelly. And apparently he has informed the Australian government of this information he's speaking about.
That went out to prove he was wrong. And there was one study, they fabricated the evidence, and that got published in The Lancet, the most prestigious medical magazine in the world, with fabricated evidence. And there was another study, Alan, they overdosed the patients with hydroxychloroquine. They gave them 5 to 6 times the recommended maximum daily dose. And they said, oh, look, it doesn't work. All these people we give hydroxychloroquine to are dying. Is it any wonder they overdosed them with a poisonous and lethal toxic dose? And that's the evidence that our medical bureaucrats are holding up and saying it doesn't work.
Well, what's your party? You're in government. Where's the Prime Minister?
Well, Alan, we have to, I can understand the Prime Minister, he has to go by our medical bureaucrats' experts. Now,
well, that's not advice.
I've written to the head of the TGA. I've written to the head of our National COVID Energy Task Force. I've written to our chief medical officers, and I've given them all the evidence. And I'd just like to go through. This study was published.
Now, not so long ago, people's channels and people's information was getting deleted from YouTube for mentioning a few various treatments, and some of these treatments were recommended in relation to COVID. All of a sudden, we now have Fauci saying that these interventions might actually be effective.
You should consider. For example, if you are deficient in vitamin D, that does have an impact on your susceptibility to infection. So I would not mind recommending, and I do it myself, taking vitamin D supplements. The other vitamin that people take is vitamin C because it's a good antioxidant.
And we have to look back in history to make sure that we don't repeat mistakes from the past.
Medical scandals of the century, according to a leading health expert in Brussels. The Council of Europe health chief has accused major pharmaceutical firms of organizing a campaign of panic and unduly influencing World Health Organization decisions. And with European countries now burdened with bills for millions of unwanted doses of the swine flu vaccine, he wants an investigation. Our science correspondent Tom Clark has this report.
Flu viruses can spread.
64,000 people dead, tens of thousands hospitalised, a country crippled by a virus. The predictions for the impact of swine flu on Britain were grim. The government's response, spending hundreds of millions of pounds on antiviral drugs and vaccines, adverts and leaflets. But 10 months into the pandemic, only 355 Britons have died, and globally, the virus hasn't lived up to our fears. Were governments misled into preparing for the worst? Politicians in Brussels are now asking for an investigation into the role pharmaceutical companies played in influencing political decisions that led to a swine flu spending spree.
There must be a process to get more transparency, how the decisions in the WHO, how they function, and who is influencing the decisions of the WHO, and what is the role of the pharmaceutical industry there. I'm very suspicious about the processes which are behind
The Council of Europe Committee want the investigation to focus on the World Health Organization's decision to lower the threshold required for a pandemic to be formally declared.
Could something like this be happening at the moment? And let's hear what an ex-advisor to the massive pharmaceutical company Pfizer has to say.
But I know, because I have seen it, internal undeclared priorities for the NHS are to maintain COVID stance, keep the NHS lightly loaded through the winter, and the reason they're doing it is to cope with the expected second wave. Now, someone in government, either Hancock or Ferguson or Sage, has explicitly run the numbers and decided that it's okay to have excess avoidable deaths in order to be prepared. Now, I want you to ask them, Julia, to come on the air and actually announce the calculus that they have made, because it's not an accident, it's a deliberate policy. But I know, because I have seen it, internal undeclared priorities for the NHS are to maintain COVID stance, keep the NHS lightly loaded through.
Okay, we're going to split this show up into two parts because there's just so much information. What I'm going to do is break down some headlines from different publications, and we're going to go through them. So we'll see you soon.